I had been conditioned to believe, and you start asking the questions of why. Because I think right now we're going through this wave. I call it African Revolution or African Pride, where we're coming to our own. We need to see ourselves as proud African citizens. And for children, where do you start? You start with the toys and you start with the books. The book has done well because I can say the online sales or people who buy the books, they've gone beyond the continent. I'd get requests, yes, say from Europe, also from the States as well. In terms of Africa, given that I'm based in South Africa, of course, most of my sales are here.
Hello, Africa. You're listening to 1000 African Voices. I'm your host, Aburengwi C, coming to you from our Johannesburg studios. 1000 African Voices is a program that profiles Africans of diverse cultures who have traveled and lived across the African continent and the world. In this series, we will collect and share stories from all parts of Africa. Welcome.
1000 African Voices.
Hello, Africa, and welcome to another episode of 1000 African Voices. Today we are joined by Fatuma Abdullah, who will shortly introduce herself to the listeners of 1000 African Voices. Hello, Fatuma.
Hi, how are you?
Fatuma, I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm good, I'm great. Thank you.
Great. Fatuma, once again, welcome to 1000 African Voices, where we are attempting to record and share 1000 voices. So I'm grateful that you've agreed to lend your voice to our project. Maybe the best place to start, Fatuma, is just for you to give our listeners a sense of who you are. So when you are confronted with the question of who you are, what's your normal response? Who's Fatuma Abdullah?
That's a good question. I mean, I think I'm taken back to the days of when I used to do interviews for work. But who am I? I normally start with, at least my point of reference is, I am a child of God. And then I also say that in terms of who I am a spiritual being having a human experience. And then I am also, my responsibilities on this planet, I would say, is a mom. I'm a mom to 2 children. I am a sister. I am an auntie. I am a friend. I am a wife. Yeah, there are many roles I do play on this earth. So in a nutshell, that is who I am. And the roles I play is, in terms of what I do, is I'm an author for children's books. I write children's books.
You write children's books. So we're going to at least talk about that on some level or at some depth. But before that, Fatuma, where are you talking to us from? And where were you born? Where were you raised? What's your background?
Okay, I'm talking to you from Joburg. My family's here. And my children go to school in Joburg. So currently Joburg is home. But otherwise, I was born and raised in Nairobi, in Kenya. I grew up there in terms of all my childhood. And if I remember my childhood growing up, I was born in Langata, which is west of Nairobi. And those were the good old days where we used to play on the streets, know all our neighbors. And everybody knew everybody, and everybody was almost like a parent to you. You'd never be seen walking on the road without someone reprimanding you or asking you a question. which I find is very different nowadays. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask that, is there a reason why you're bringing that up? Do you feel that in 2019 that is no longer the case? Do you think it's different now than it was back then?
Oh, yeah, it's totally different. I mean, just an example with my kids, even if they go outside, I'm standing outside to watch them cycle their bikes and come back. I think we are missing I don't know what to call it. Okay, here in Joburg, we refer to it as Ubuntu, but I think we focus so much more on our nucleus. We don't know our neighbors anymore. We don't find out, or it becomes like you're a nosy neighbor. So, unlike before, where everybody knew everybody, it was almost like a communal type of living situation. Here, it's very mind your own business type of thing, which I think also, I mean, when I go back home, I find more or less the same thing. So I don't know if it is the evolution of where we're going to, or yeah, just the way things are for now.
Yeah, I was going to challenge you on that and ask whether it's maybe you who has shifted and moved into a different environment. I think you've already said that when you go home, you find that it is the same. When you say when you go home, are you going back to the exact place where you grew up? So what I want to establish is whether the environment is exactly the same, but people's behaviors or way of being has changed.
Okay, I don't go to exactly where I grew up because now my parents moved and yeah, things have changed a bit. So, no, but still, I think it's the same because now you find a lot of children stay indoors. They don't play outside because we now have all this electronics, your tablets, your games, your video games. So you don't find even a lot of kids playing outside. So I think it is the way we're moving, the way we're kind of evolving into, yeah, all this technology type of thing. People would rather, I mean, it's the way we were saying, you WhatsApp somebody who's next door rather than before you would stand outside and have a chat.
So yeah. I'm entertaining this discussion because it's something that I personally think about a lot. I've got a 13-year-old boy who cannot be separated from his PlayStation. I look at it, and when I compare that to how I grew up, I feel like the world has changed, that he doesn't know his neighbor, but I think of it as a bad thing. But then I'd like to think about how my parents thought of me growing up, whether I grew up the same way that they did and how they viewed that. And does my son view it as a bad thing, or for him it's just how things are?
Yeah, actually, that's a good way of looking at it. But I think with our kids, my son is 8 and my daughter is 10. I mean, I literally have to tell them to get outside the house. I always tell them, you need to breathe fresh air. So go outside and do something. So I try to limit the amount of video games or even just the amount of screen time that they have. So like on Saturday, I would be, you won't touch your tablet or anything until, say, 4. So all the time they need to find something to do. And funny enough, they'd go outside, get bored, play with stuff. But by the time it gets to 4, they have forgotten it is 4 because they've come up with all sorts of things that they're doing outside. So I think they still that need. But I think also for parents these days, with especially working parents, by the time you come home, you're so tired and you want the kids to be quiet. So if the tablet is going to make them quiet, well... you give into it. So yeah, I think right now we're living in a very high pressured, people are trying to do this. So the balance is, there's a very thin line. But I think for me, yeah, you have to be deliberate if you want them to enjoy something. Because of course the easy way out. Sometimes also me, I'm just like, okay, mommy needs peace and quiet. Go sit and be quiet. And the only time they can be quiet is when you just hear on the tablets or the games.
Yeah. All right. No, Fatuma, thank you for at least indulging me in that conversation. I think it's an important conversation. Whether it is evolution or revolution, I suppose only time will tell. Let's now explore the work that you do. You've already mentioned that you write children's books. I'm sort of curious to understand first how you ended up as an author of children's books and sort of what goes into or through the mind of an adult who writes children's books. Can you maybe just talk us through that whole process as well as how you got into that space?
For me, I look at it as part of my journey. I think we're all in life the way we're going through stuff, and we have phases in this journey. So initially, I think like every African child in our generation, I don't know if I'm divulging my age at this time. Our parents wanted us either to be accountants, economics, doctors. And so I followed that path in terms of ticking all the boxes, went to university, I studied economics, and then I came back. I worked for a financial institution, and then I worked also for the UN. It was one of the projects, and I was very happy. I think, at that point in life, I thought this is what I want to do, and this is what makes me happy. And then I got my daughter, and I think also broadening and growing and looking at the way things are. I mean, sometimes I think we take a lot of things as status quo. I was questioning a lot of things at that time, also trying to unlearn some of the things that I had been conditioned to believe, and you start asking the questions of why. Because I think right now we're going through this wave of where I call it African revolution or African pride, where we're coming to our own. And one of the things which is big for us, especially for the women, I would say, is our hair. So you don't have to straighten your hair anymore. These days it is okay just to have your afro. And sometimes either you can comb it or not comb it, and no one can challenge you anymore to tell you need to hold it back. And for me, when I got my daughter, I thought to myself, what is your reference point? Because I started asking myself, in terms of being African, what is my reference point? Who can I call to? And I say at that time that this is African. And we're all African in terms of our language, our culture, everything else. But for me, in terms of literature, because I grew up on the classics, which is fine because we learned a lot of things, and I don't think I turned out too badly. But for my daughter, I wanted her to see herself in a book or in a toy somewhere. And I could not find anything. I was going through this and I thought to myself, this is strange. How come I've never realized it before? But I guess before I wasn't looking. It's just now when I had children and I started thinking we need to see ourselves as proud African citizens. And for children, where do you start? You start with the toys and you start with the books.
Yeah, what I wanted to ask, so there's clearly a connection between the toys, and I'm going to ask you about the Akiki dolls. So you've already established a connection between the books that you write as well as the toys. So it sounds like for you, it's about defining for the young ones an African identity. It's interesting that you touched on the hair as well. It's a personal gripe of mine that we're still going through as Africans, a discussion on hair. And every time I raise the issue, I am very quickly cut down to size and sort of be reminded that for men, it's a lot easier to just cut our hair. But for women, they need to, suppose, look a certain way, which then requires that they put all sorts of things or wear all kinds of things on their heads. But going back to the books as well as the toys, what came first between you being an author versus you being an entrepreneur who produces, or the Akiki dolls?
What came first actually was the doll, Akiki. In my head, I had this character. So I told myself, the same way we have like your Disney characters, we need an African character. So I formed this character in my head and I called her Akiki. Akiki is a Swahili word. It means ruby, the precious stone. I liked the name because I like rubies in terms of it's a rare stone and it's associated with nobility, it's associated with confidence. So those are qualities which we'd want for our kids. So the doll came first, and I remember when I first got the sample, I was just as excited as a young child looking at a doll that is actually brown. And the more I go into this and I realize it's a whole change in your mindset, because what we've known as a doll has always been your Barbie dolls or a white doll. So even when I started introducing this to the children, the first question that asked me is, why isn't it white? And I thought, okay, you'd have to ask the question, so what color are you? And you'd have to pose a bit because it is almost recognition. And I tend to think, for kids especially, they don't see color until we tell them or until they get older. Because my daughter started realizing when she was a bit older that, we're not the same. There's a bit of a difference. But when they're very much younger, like at crèche or kindergarten, we're all the same. And I think for me, I wanted to let them know, even if you're different, you're just as beautiful as you are. But we need to keep affirming this because we have for so long not affirmed the African child. So we need to start affirming them so that even when you realize that you're an African child, you're no lesser than anybody else.
I really am reflecting on what you said, that when you present the doll and a child will ask what they are looking at, you have to pause and allow them to recognize the moment, or to sort of allow the penny to drop for it to really register. Because I'm sure just mentally that process must have such a fundamental impact on how that child then sees him or herself from that point on. I suppose the point I'm making is the work that you're doing is more than just distributing dolls for me. Obviously, I'm telling you something that you already know, but it is something that really talks to identity at its core, what it means. Because if I were a girl and I grew up playing with a Barbie doll, then I watch television and I watch a movie, and the people that I see in those movies look like the Barbie dolls that I grew up playing with, then obviously my whole outlook on life is in that way. Whereas if I grew up playing with Akiki dolls, then I watch Lupita Nyong'o on some movie, my perspective
Wakanda.
is very different. Yes, something like that.
Yes. For me, it was very important because it also takes me to the very first time when I realized, because growing up in Nairobi, it's almost like I didn't see any color, and I was not differentiating whether there's black or white. It's only when I went to university, which was in the UK, and then it was later when I had someone saying Fatuma. I was just walking into the room and the person was trying to explain who Fatuma is, and the other person wasn't getting it. So he said, Fatuma, the black girl. And I stood there and I looked at myself and I thought, oh, okay. This was my introduction to colors. So I thought, oh, right. I mean, as I said, as soon as I walk into the room, I am a black woman. I can't run away from that. So I need to learn to embrace that. But it doesn't mean you're any lesser. It doesn't mean that you can't do this. It doesn't mean that you haven't been profiled here. I mean, now I think it's important starting the affirmation at a very young age. And for me, books also are a very good channel, because books, I say, is the gift that keeps on giving. I find, especially with our children or myself, for example, when you go out there, you're seen as an African first. So you would want to know, when they're talking about Africa and you are African, you need to know you. When we say know thyself. So you need to know more beyond the borders of your country. You need to start understanding the rest of Africa, because the more I travel across Africa, we have a common thread that runs along us. We are one and the same, despite our languages and our culture. There's a certain respect, I think, that we carry, which is African. You can know, I mean, the business of whereby an older person enters a bus and you need to stand up even without being told. So those are the certain things that I think we need to take pride in and to keep on passing this on to our kids.
It's really lovely. I'm sure that the UK prepared you well for being in South Africa, because when it comes to color, there are very few countries in the world do that as well, in inverted commas, as well as the South Africans when it comes to differentiating people based on color. And just today I was in a meeting, a one-on-one session, and this person looks at me, and the person being of a Caucasian color, and they say, "Oh, yes, I had a meeting with this black girl." Then after that, there was this white woman. I thought, gee, you could have chosen, I don't know, something like a name or a different description, but in that person's mind, that is the best way of describing what they wanted to say, because that is the mental conditioning of a typical, in this case, South African, whereas, and this is what I've observed, and I'm going back to you growing up in Kenya and not really thinking of people within the different color groups. Within the South African context, you'll find that those who grew up in their homelands where there were only people who looked like them have a very different mindset to those that grew up in, say, Soweto, which is sort of a mixed group of people who are very close to other colors. So they think of color in a very different way. So, yeah, the environment, I suppose, has such a big impact. Maybe let's go back to Akiki, Fatuma. How long have you been producing or selling the dolls, and how are you doing on the sales side?
Let me just say, I launched Akiki in 2016, May, and I launched her together with the first book, which is Akiki Short Stories. And it was a daunting task. I think any entrepreneur first going to market after being in corporate for such a long time, it doesn't prepare you as much, because I normally say you need to toughen up in terms of criticism, and things don't always work out like the way you'd like to work out. I mean, you're excited about a product and you expect when you go there, everyone will be singing and dancing with you. The reception has been great in terms of the doll and the books as well. And yeah, the sales have been the first time with the introduction, as I said, it was a whole shift in mindset as well. So a lot of people are like, okay, now we have one. And I think from 2016 until now, we've had a lot of other black dolls coming to the market. So it's more or less been now something that's, well, I can't say normal because some people still have not seen a brown doll. But yeah, the business has been picking up. It has been growing. For me, as I said, whenever you start something or you purpose yourself for something, I always ask myself, especially on the days maybe where things are not too good, why? Why am I doing what it is I'm doing? And whenever I go back to my why, then I can still get out of bed and still think of another story about Akiki, or think of picking up the calls and trying to do sales.
Oh, lovely. I paused because I'm sort of trying to put myself in your shoes. It is quite difficult because I have not been on that journey where you wake up and you want to sell your ideas. So I was thinking about you saying when you understand the why, it then makes it easier for you to get up and go when days are dark.
I wouldn't say easier. I would just say in terms of that's your motivation to continue doing what you're doing. You might not crack the nut today. You might crack it tomorrow. You might crack it next week.
So I'm one of those. I have not, I suppose, held a brown doll. So I'm sure at this point there will be some listeners who are in the same boat as me. So if I want to get hold of an Akiki doll, Fatuma, how do I go about that? Where do I go to access some of your products?
I'm online, akikidolls.com. That is AKIKI dolls, DOLLS.com. And I'm also on social media. So Facebook at Akiki Dolls and Instagram at Akiki Dolls as well. So normally those are my touch points. Yeah.
And the books, I see you've written at least 5 children's books. How difficult is it to write a children's book? What goes through, what kind of mindset or state of mind you need to be in to put together a children's book?
It's harder. It's much harder than writing, I would say, like if I decided to write an adult book, because with adults, I think you just pour it out there. My source of inspiration is actually my kids. I normally say when I hear their laughter or they're enjoying something, I just watch them and it's almost like a story. I think kids, their innocence and their purity is so beautiful to watch. And they look at things in a very plain and simple manner. So when I look at things like that and I'm able to come up with a story which my children can enjoy, they're normally my guinea pigs after I've written like a manuscript. And then I can also tell if it is too long, because it's almost like when you're reading kids' story time, if you start taking too long, their attention then moves on to something else. So you know, okay, I need to still bring my point across, but at the same time, it needs to be entertaining, and in terms of it needs to teach them something. Also, old school with the fact that when they read books, there needs to be like a moral to the story. What am I trying to teach? And the way I've created the Akiki character, she's a relatable character, and she lives in an urban town. So it's just like an African girl in an African family, and she lives in an urban town, and she's traveling across Africa. And in each and every African country, she's looking for the magic in that country. And so far, the books I've written, she's traveled to Nairobi and she's traveled to Botswana. And of course, she's done South Africa. So she's been to the Drakensberg. And in all that, it's looking at it through a child's eyes and also trying to, learn your lessons. Because when you look at life in that way, there's always between the experience and the lessons that you learn is what I try and put across to the kids. So it's very relatable. Whenever I do story time and you start conversing with the kids, everyone has a story if they have been to Drakensberg or where they'd like to go and what they'd like to see. I find that exposure, as I said, in terms of being African, knowing the other African cultures or even learning how to say hello in another African language is very powerful for us, because it's also an icebreaker whenever you go to another country.
I totally agree. And I'm wondering how you measure your success. So if I write an adult's book, some fiction, I'll measure success first by the number of sales. Then in 2019, there'll obviously then be some online chatting about the book. And if it's a really good book, it might then get turned into a movie. For you, how do you know that you're doing well? Like, how do you know that the books that you're reaching are doing what you intend them to do?
That's a good question. Measuring of success. One of the things I really appreciate is feedback from a mother who has bought the book, or even feedback I get on Instagram, where I remember there's a parent who bought the book and they're actually in, was it Sweden or Vienna? And he told me this has become my child's favorite book. Every night before going to bed, she's like, Daddy, let's read another story of Akiki. For them, it was Kenyans living abroad, the diaspora. So because they're also looking for something to, to start inducting the child to as being African, because then they realize, so this is the language Daddy speaks, or this is where Daddy's from. And that became the child's favorite book. So I take success in terms of people are appreciating the product. They're getting the product. I mean, the book has done well because I can say the online sales or people who buy the books, they've gone beyond the continent. I'd get requests, yes, say from Europe, also from the States as well. And in terms of Africa, given that I'm based in South Africa, of course, most of my sales are here. But yes, I think for me, my challenging bit would be logistics. logistics to, what is this? To courier the books and the doll. Normally that's where it becomes challenging because then the price goes way up and sometimes it doesn't make sense. So I normally do the African thing whereby I'm like, who do you know who is coming to Joburg?
Yeah. No, I mean, it is our way. It is the cheapest way, but it also allows people to connect. Just when you deliver a book to a stranger, you've connected with someone. And next time, hey, who knows, they may need something to be delivered, or you may need something else to be delivered. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like, who do you know who's coming? As you're saying, I also appreciate the fact that people get to know you and get to understand your story, because I don't just want to touch and go, because then you lose kind of the relationship you have with your customers. So the fact that people feel that I'm very approachable is one of my things that's in terms of I would term as success, because then I would also get, the other day I got someone telling me, thank you so much. I mean, you're so inspirational and stuff like that. I was like, that is, I mean, for me, it's very encouraging. If I wake up in the morning and I find that as a message on Instagram or on Facebook, I really appreciate such things, because then I'm just confirming my why. I may not get there today, I may not get there tomorrow, but for me, it's a journey. And I think that's how we should take life. I mean, of course, we need to do things, and once we have goals that we're trying to. But if we continue to focus on the goal, there are many ways to get to the goal. And with each and every curve that we come through, there's a lesson to learn. So you learn your lesson and you keep growing and you keep growing until you get to where you need to be.
Yeah. And personally, I'm reflecting on whether the place we believe we need to get to, whether it really exists or whether we should rather focus on the journey itself, the process, which is, it sounds like listening to you that you're actually enjoying going through the process. Yes, you've got a goal, but if you make it about the goal, as you've said, there are many other different ways of getting to the goal. But if you've chosen a path, then you may as well enjoy that path, because perhaps all it is about is really about that process and not really the destination. Because once you get there, then what? And that's probably one question we don't think about a lot. Anyway, that's really just my reflection on...
No, but you're right. The past has already happened, so you can't change anything there, really. So my thing is, make sure you learn from your past, because it has happened. So lessons learned, life lessons. Yeah. And then now the present is what you can change, because I'm sitting here having a conversation with you. So I'm fully present. My energy is all here with you. I would stay away of trying to think about, okay, so what do I need to do next? What do I need to talk about next? Because that's not going to help me, and my conversation won't be wholesome because my head and mind is also somewhere else. So I think being present and enjoying the process, you need to learn to be grateful for every situation that has happened. One sale, that's good. Tomorrow, let's try and do 10 sales. So then after that, that also gives you learn to appreciate things, and you also learn to, I always tell my children, breathe. When they're crying and they're upset, I'm like, okay. I can't hear what you're saying. You need to breathe, and then let's have the conversation. So that brings you, okay. And then you realize whatever it is can still be handled.
Yeah. More often than not, you get to that same conclusion. I just wanted to go back to this process issue. So this morning, there was a lady, she's 84, and she's currently acting in Broadway. Forgot her name, something Jackson, but she was an MP in the UK back in her day. Now she's an actress at 84. And when you listen to people that are of an advanced age, they seem to understand the importance of staying in the moment. And perhaps as we get older, something happens that reminds you that actually tomorrow is not guaranteed. So you may as well focus on today. Sort of, as you breathe the air, be aware of the air that you're breathing. Be aware that there are flowers around you. Pick one, smell it. That's happening now. So I was still thinking about that in the morning. So, okay, she's 84, so her tomorrow is less guaranteed than that of a 10-year-old, for instance. So for her, living in the moment has got way more significance than in, say, a young person's mind. But I did wonder how our lives would be if all of us treated life like that at whatever age, where you just stay in the moment and be fully present in that moment. Yeah.
I think, of course, it's a sense of maturity. And as you're saying, as we grow older, then you start noticing, "Ugh, why would I be so worried about this?" But also in terms of curbing stress and anxiety. Because anxiety, you're panicking about tomorrow, which, as I said, you have no control over. And to have, because now we're trying to balance all these things. You have health, you have your family, you have your financial situations, friends, and everything. So you all can't be everything at the same time. So when you are present and say you decide, okay, fine, I'm going to spend time with X, then it's better to be there with, say, okay, I decide I'm going to have time with my husband. I better be present with him there and fully give him all my attention instead of thinking, oh, the kids need this, oh, the kids need, because though I said I'm giving you my time, I'm not there. And you find that you're not building a wholesome relationship at that time because you're doing everything else rather than trying to be present at that moment. So for me, what I've tried to do always is learn to prioritize stuff, allow myself to almost schedule things how they need to be. If I'm going to spend this time working, how much am I going to spend with the kids? How much am I going to spend on myself as well? I need to make sure that I'm also whole to be able to give to others, and also when to spend with my friends. So all these things, the thing is, if you try to do everything at the same time, it won't work. That's where stress comes in. That's where you're anxious. But if you just pause and try and prioritize and diarize, and I think all these things start for learn to say no, learn to say no when you don't want to do something, have borders so then you don't have people infringing into your personal space when you don't want them to be there. So yeah, I don't think a 10-year-old would understand all that. But as we grow older and we start realizing in life that, it's bigger than just having everything. Sometimes now we've learned that success is not necessarily, it's nice to have your money in the bank, but they have what they call where you're so rich, but yet you're so poor because your quality of life is just not there because you neglected something.
Fatuma, I'm genuinely so engrossed in this discussion, really enjoying listening to your views because you're forcing me to really think deeply about a lot of things, and hopefully our listeners will have the same experience so they can also reflect on what's important on their side, what's the definition of success.
Mm-hmm.
More and more, we are reflecting on whether money equates to success, and it's a challenging one because the lack thereof can lead to a challenging life, generally speaking, but an excess of the same thing, money, doesn't necessarily equate to success. So you sort of think of that point of diminishing returns where you've got a lot more than you need. Therefore, your level of contentment, satisfaction, or happiness can no longer be equated to how much you have. As we're about to wrap up, Fatuma, the last question I wanted to ask is just on the books that you either currently reading or you've read in the past that have influenced you, or books that you maybe would like our listeners to read so that they can at least broaden their horizons as well. What are some of the books that you have read or are reading that have had an impact on you?
I think the book that actually gave me the turning point was The Four Agreements. It's by Ruiz. Yes. You know, it that one made me stop. It made me stop because, as I said, we grew up. Even as a Christian, when you start taking a lot of these things, we take Christianity like a religion. And then you stop and start asking yourself, okay, so why is it that I believed this? And you come and find out, okay, I don't know, because this was happening and you just went on with the drive. And now you're asking yourself, as you're trying now to have a relationship with, now you're focusing, you understand that you're a spiritual being and you're thinking, oh, okay. So now you start. So for Miguel, he unpacked a lot of that for me. And then the way he brought it down to the 4 agreements, which for me, I constantly keep. I think the 4 agreements was like, you always do your best. You don't make assumptions. So you always ask. And it was, what was that? Be impeccable with your word.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. In fact, that don't take things personally just like liberated me totally.
When they say, if someone says, "Gee, you look great, your shirt is unbelievably beautiful," like, don't take that personally.
No, that's fine, because I said, for me, it liberated me. And I thought, oh my goodness, because people are always projecting themselves. And actually, we thought that it's about me. And then I was just like, half of these things is not about me. People are going through their own struggles. They're going through their own things. So it's also in terms of, I became more empathetic and more patient, because then I would now pause and ask you the questions in terms of, you don't get upset anymore. You're just like, okay, so this is how you're feeling. And if things are not about you, it's easier for you to be more objective. Because then, the conversation wouldn't be like, why are you talking to me like this? It'd be like, clearly you're upset about something. What are you upset about? Then it almost takes the other person aback, because you're not retaliating in terms of, okay, fine, now we're having an argument.
Yes.
So I think, for me, even, with my relationships, it's really improved. And also in terms of just unpacking, I remember the other day I was reading to my children. We were doing Sunday school at home. And so we were reading the story of Moses and how I think the mom put him on the Nile. And then I'm like, so they were in Egypt. I'm like, when I was taught this in Sunday school, they made it sound like we were somewhere in Israel. And I was like, all this thing was happening in the continent. And how come we didn't embrace that? And how come we didn't think we were special? We were thinking other people are special and we are not special.
I actually don't need to ask you any more questions on books, because the moment someone talks about the 4 agreements, then I know that you've had time to really reflect on the things that are important, to do your best, never taking anything personally, to be impeccable with your word, and forgot the 4th one. It happens all the time. Always forget the 4th one.
Don't make assumptions. Ask. And that one also works very well in business, because, especially when you get rejected for something, don't just take no for no. Don't make assumptions that they didn't like the product. I was just going to ask, okay, why do you like it? Answers could be it could be reasonable. At that time, the product wasn't for him at that time, maybe later, or maybe they have no space, or whatever the reason is. So, even I think in relationships also, we tend to have a lot of conversations. Meanwhile, you just ask the question instead of making an assumption.
On that note, Fatuma Adbullah, the founder and owner of Akiki Distributors, the guys who produce the African dolls, and they also author or distribute children's books. So if you're interested, we will include all of that detail on 1000africanvoices.com. You can also follow, and you should follow, Fatuma as well as Akiki Distributors on the different social media platforms, as she mentioned earlier. So on that note, Fatuma, thank you for the time. Thank you for the wisdom that you have shared, and for giving
Thank you for having me.
A different perspective on what it means to be African, what it means to be an African child. Because once we understand who we are, then our potential is definitely unlimited. So thank you for joining our program.
No, thank you so much for having me.
It's really been a pleasure, and all the very best with the dolls, the books, and want to encourage our listeners to go out there and support. You're really not supporting Fatuma, you're supporting yourself, you're supporting the children that you are tasked with raising. Because when you and those children understand who they are as Africans, then half your job is done. So go out there and look for the dolls as well as the books. So on that note, we'll leave it there. Until next time, Kungana Africa, and take care.
All right, take care, Asante.
1000 African Voices.
You've been listening to 1000 African Voices. Please join us next time as we bring you yet another African voice. 1000 African Voices is produced by Aburengwi C. Sam Ganich is our sound engineer, with our head researcher Jones Maleka. The intro soundtrack for the show is by the legendary Salif Gator from his 1995 album Forlorn. The song you're listening to right now is by Chronix, and the title of the song is Legend. For more information, including the contact details of our guests, please visit us on our website www.1000africanvoices.com. You can also subscribe to our show on iTunes by searching for 1000 African Voices. We are also available on Stitcher. You can find us as well on Podbean. The only thing we ask of you is that you subscribe to our show by logging on to 1000africanvoices.com and click the subscribe button. That helps us grow. It helps us keep producing and bringing to you more African voices. Until next time, Kungana Africa, and take care.
Being an ordinary person doing what's right. Yesterday at the football game, a little girl asked me my name. She said, "Sir, I've seen you before, tell me who are you?" I said, "I am a legend that you never heard of before." I said, "I am a lion, but you never heard me roar. I am a hero that nobody celebrates. But if one person remembers my name, that means on the ocean of fame I'm an unknown sailor. I'm the percussionist playing with the whalers, the one with the shaker, the mover and shaker. My name wasn't on the front of the paper, but me not cater. Much more than the worker is greater. Creation glorifies creator. So all deeds done are in the name of my maker. I am a legend that you probably never hear about. Words from the lion's mouth. I am a hero that nobody celebrates. But if one person remembers my name, give praise, that means I made a change. Story of my life, ordinary person just like you. If you take a look inside, you see the great things that people do. We're out here changing lives day and night, day in, day out. BBC don't show it, CNN don't show it. He's out.